Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be talking cats. Specifically, we're going to be talking feline neurology.
All right.
So picture this. You're a vet, and a 4-year-old calico cat comes in.
Okay.
And she's got all sorts of weird symptoms. She's losing her balance. She's leaning against walls.
Whoa.
And just, acting a little off. And we're going to be unpacking this really interesting case study from the 2024 Journal of Small Animal Practice about this cat and her really unusual diagnosis.
It's a tough one. So yeah, these kinds of symptoms in a cat, they often point towards something going on in the nervous system.
Right.
But the vets really had to dig deep to figure out what was going on.
Yeah. So they started with the basics, right? Like blood work.
Right.
Just to rule out any obvious problems.
Exactly.
But here's the thing. The blood work comes back totally normal.
Yeah, that's always makes it a little trickier.
Yeah, adding to the mystery.
Yeah, so that normal blood work really narrowed things down. Okay,
Yeah.
we know it's probably something with the nervous system. So what do you do when you need to see inside a cat's brain? MRI.
Ah, yeah, that makes sense. So they put this kitty in for an MRI, and what do they find?
A mass.
A mass, right?
Yeah.
But not just any mass.
Right, not just any mass. This one was tucked away in a really delicate spot called the cerebellopontine angle. It's kind of like, think of it as like a busy intersection in the brain where the cerebellum, the pons, and a bunch of really important cranial nerves all come together. So having a mass in this location is a big deal. It's not something you want to see.
So they have this image of the mass from the MRI.
Yeah.
What did it look like? Like, was it a big, scary blob?
So the article describes it as having heterogeneous hyperintensity on T2-weighted images, which basically means the mass lit up in a kind of patchy way on the MRI. So suggesting that it wasn't just one uniform structure. It also showed what we call isointensity on P1-weighted images and moderate contrast enhancement. All these details help to give the vets a clearer picture of what they were dealing with.
So they have the location. They have a visual of this mysterious mass. What happens next?
Well, they decided surgery was the best option,
Okay.
but they needed a very specific approach to reach this part of the brain because it's so delicate. They opted for what's called a caudotentorial approach. Think of it like a highly specialized roadmap for brain surgery.
Okay, so they go in. What does the tumor look like in real life?
So the article says it was smooth and grayish-white in appearance. Unfortunately, despite the best efforts of the surgeon, things took a turn for the worse during recovery.
Oh, no. What happened?
The cat went into cardiac arrest, and despite everyone's best efforts, she couldn't be revived.
That's so sad. It makes you really realize how delicate these procedures are.
It really does. But even though the outcome was tragic, the story doesn't end there.
Yeah.
Remember, this is a deep dive. So the next step was to analyze the tumor tissue under a microscope to try to figure out, what it was. This is called histopathological analysis.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. What did they find under the microscope?
Well, they found a whole bunch of densely packed, spindle-shaped cells arranged in a specific pattern called a herringbone.
Oh, interesting.
They also saw a high number of mitoses. Basically, this means the cells were dividing really rapidly, a classic sign of a tumor.
Right.
And there were even areas of hemorrhage and necrosis, basically bleeding and tissue death within the tumor. All of this pointed toward a diagnosis of a malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor, or MPNST for short.
Okay, so they finally had a name for the culprit. But what makes this MPNST so special?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Remember how we talked about the tumor's location, the cerebellopontine angle?
Yes.
Typically, MPNSTs are found growing on peripheral nerves, hence the name. But in this case, the tumor wasn't attached to any nerves at all.
Wait, so this tumor was in a place where MPNSTs aren't usually found?
Exactly.
And it wasn't even connected to a nerve.
Right.
That's wild.
It is wild. And that's what makes this case so unique and why it really challenges what we know about MPNSTs.
Yeah.
If they're supposed to come from nerves,
Yeah.
how do you explain a tumor that's just hanging out in the brain seemingly on its own?
That is the million-dollar question. What could possibly explain this?
Well, to get some more answers, the vets used a technique called immunohistochemistry.
Okay.
Basically, it's like using special dyes to highlight specific proteins within the tumor cells.
Okay.
And it helps us to understand where they came from and how they behave.
Okay, I'm ready for another science lesson. What did these special dyes reveal?
They found strong positivity for something called vimentin, moderate positivity for GFAP, and mild positivity for S100. And now, hold on to your hats because we're going to break down what all of that means.
I'm all ears.
All right, so vimentin, it's typically found in cells that come from connective tissue in the body. GFAP is a marker for glial cells. These are the support cells of the nervous system.
Okay.
And S100 is a protein that's found in a bunch of different cell types, including those in the nervous system.
So seeing all these markers together in one tumor is pretty unusual, right?
It is. And that's what makes this case so fascinating. It's like this MPNST is breaking all the rules.
It sounds like we need to rethink what we know about these MPNSTs. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a step back and talk about what this means for other cats and the vets who treat them.
That's a great point. So we need to connect this back to the real world.
Exactly. What are the bigger implications here?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that it can be tough to diagnose these neurological cases in cats.
Yeah.
Right.
Like if you're a vet and a cat comes in with these really vague symptoms, even with tools like MRI, it can be really hard to pinpoint what's going on.
Especially when the tumor's hiding in a place where it's not supposed to be. It's like playing hide and seek in the brain.
Exactly. And this case, I think, really highlights how important it is to consider everything, even the rare stuff.
Yeah.
You got to keep an open mind. Don't dismiss anything too quickly.
So if you're a cat owner listening to this and your furry friend starts acting a little off, what should you do? Should you rush him to the vet for an MRI right away?
I wouldn't jump to that right away.
Okay.
I think the first thing is just to observe your cat really closely.
Okay.
See if there are any changes in their behavior or their coordination, their appetite, anything like that. If you see something off, then definitely take him to the vet.
Okay.
They'll do a thorough exam and then figure out what the next step should be.
So early detection is key.
Always.
Even if it doesn't lead to a happy ending, like in this case. Better safe than sorry. Absolutely. The earlier you catch a problem, the better the chances of successful treatment.
Speaking of treatment, what are the options for MPNSTs in cats?
Yeah.
Is surgery the only way to go?
For now, surgery is really the main treatment, but because these tumors are so aggressive, they tend to come back.
Yeah.
So the outlook isn't always great. There's research going on looking into things like radiation and chemo.
Okay.
But we need more studies to really know how well they work in cats.
Yeah, it's a tough situation.
Yeah.
Surgery is risky and other treatments are still being explored.
Yeah, it's a real challenge.
It sounds like we need more research.
We do. We need to figure out what causes these tumors, how they behave, and how we can treat them more effectively.
Okay, let's go back to those immunohistochemistry results for a minute. You mentioned vimentin, GFAP, and S100. Can you explain those a little bit more? What do they tell us about this weird tumor?
Yeah, so remember those markers are like fingerprints that give us clues about where the cells came from, what they're like. So the strong vimentin staining suggests that some of these tumor cells, they might have come from connective tissue.
Oh, so maybe like some rogue little fibroblast decided to go off script and turn into a tumor? Is that possible?
It's definitely possible, but something we need to look into more to be sure. And then there's the GFAP, which points towards a possible glial cell connection.
Right. The glial cells are those helpful little cells that support the neurons in the brain, right?
Yeah.
So could this MPNST have actually started out as a glial cell tumor?
Yeah, that's another question that needs to be answered.
Okay.
The moderate GFAP staining in this tumor suggests that some of those cells, maybe they came from glial cells, or maybe they started to look like glial cells as they grew. So
we have possible links to both connective tissue and nervous system cells.
Right.
What about that S100 protein? What's its deal?
S100 is a tough one to figure out because it's found in lots of different cell types. It's kind of like
a wild card.
Yeah, a wild card. So the mild S100 positivity in this tumor, it just adds another layer of complexity. It's possible those tumor cells, maybe they came from a type of cell that expresses S100, or maybe they picked up that characteristic as they were developing.
It's like this tumor is a master of disguise.
Yeah.
Blending in with all these different cell types.
Exactly. And that's what makes MPNSTs so hard to understand. Yeah. They don't always play by the rules.
This is getting pretty deep into cell biology.
Yeah.
What's the takeaway here? Like, what does it all mean in the grand scheme of things?
I think the biggest takeaway is that this case really challenges how we think about MPNSTs.
Okay.
We usually link them to peripheral nerves.
Right.
But this tumor was hanging out in a spot where there aren't any nerves. It tells us that there's still a lot we don't know about these tumors and where they come from.
So Could there be other, like, undiscovered origins for MPNSTs in cats?
Mm-hmm.
Could this case, like, open up a whole new area of research?
That's the million-dollar question. You know, this one case could change how we understand MPNSTs.
It's like finding a missing puzzle piece.
Yeah, it is. It's like the tumor is saying, hey, look at me. I'm doing things differently.
Right.
And that's what makes science so exciting. You know, we're always learning new things,
Yeah.
revising our theories, and pushing the boundaries of what we know.
So this cat, despite her tragic end, may have made a huge contribution to veterinary science.
She really might have. And that's why it's so important to really study and document these unusual cases. They can really change the way we think about things. They make us rethink what we know. This one case could spark a ton of new research, leading to better ways to diagnose, treat, and hopefully prevent MPNSTs in cats.
It's a reminder that every patient, every case has something to teach us.
Absolutely. That's a powerful thought.
It really is. Now, I know we've been talking a lot about the science,
Yeah.
but let's not forget about the cat herself.
You're right. We can't forget about the emotional side of this. You know, losing a pet is never easy.
Yeah.
And the fact that she didn't make it through surgery, that's really hard.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the tough decisions that vets and pet owners have to make and the risks that come with these really complicated procedures.
Absolutely. It's a reminder to really cherish every moment we have with our furry friends.
Well said.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the challenges of diagnosing MPNSTs.
Yeah.
What are some of the warning signs that vets and cat owners should be looking out for?
Any sign of something being wrong with the nervous system in a cat should be taken seriously. This includes things like lost balance, weakness, seizures, changes in behavior, difficulty walking. Any of those signs, you need to get to the vet quickly.
So even subtle changes in behavior could be a sign of something serious.
Yes, especially if those changes happen suddenly or if they get worse over time. Always better to be safe than sorry.
What about those early diagnostic tests? What can those tell us?
Blood work is usually the first thing we do. It might not tell us exactly what's wrong,
Okay.
but it can rule out other things and give us information about the cat's overall health. After that, we usually do imaging like MRI or CT scans.
Okay.
These tests let us see the brain and the spinal cord to look for anything unusual like tumors, inflammation, or structural problems.
So it's a combination of clinical signs, blood work, and imaging that helps paint the picture.
Exactly. And sometimes, even with all that information, the diagnosis is still unclear. MPNSTs in particular, they can be tricky to diagnose because they can look like other conditions, and sometimes they pop up in weird places, as we saw in this case.
It sounds like experience and a keen eye are super important for vets dealing with these cases.
They really are. And if there's any doubt, it's always a good idea to consult with a specialist, like a veterinary neurologist.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Now, I know we've covered a lot today, but before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I want to touch on one more important aspect of this case, the implications for research.
You're right. This case has opened up a whole new world of questions about MPNSTs.
It's like a launch pad for more research.
Exactly.
What are some of the areas researchers might focus on in the future?
Well, there are a few. First, we really need to dig deep into the genetics of MPNSTs. You know, are there specific genes that are messed up or changes in the genes that cause these tumors? If we could find those genetic triggers, that would be huge for developing targeted therapies.
That's so cool. So by understanding what's going on at the genetic level, we could maybe come up with better, more precise treatments?
Exactly. And then there's the question of the environment. Could exposure to certain chemicals or toxins, even viruses, could those things play a role?
There's like a nature and nurture thing.
Possibly, yeah. We need more studies to look into those connections. And of course, we have to keep searching for new treatment options. Things like immunotherapy, targeted therapies, and new surgical techniques.
So there's a lot of exciting research ahead. Hopefully we'll be able to diagnose, treat, and maybe even prevent these tumors in cats better someday.
I think so too. You know, this case showed us how much we still don't know.
Yeah.
But it's also inspired a whole bunch of new research. And that's what drives science forward.
It's a reminder that even when something tragic happens, there's always hope for the future.
Yeah, it really is amazing to think that one cat story could change how we think about MPNSTs.
It's pretty incredible, right? And this case really brings up a big question about how we define these MPNSTs.
Okay.
We always thought they had to be connected to peripheral nerves.
Right.
But this tumor wasn't anywhere near any nerves.
It's like finding a penguin in the desert.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It doesn't fit with what we thought we knew.
So are we saying that everything we know about MPNSTs could be wrong?
I don't think it's necessarily wrong.
Okay.
But it might be incomplete.
Maybe our definition is a little too narrow. Maybe there are other types of cells that can cause these tumors, or maybe it's more complicated than we thought.
Yeah.
Maybe there's like a whole bunch of different cell types interacting, and we just don't understand it yet.
So back to the drawing board for researchers.
In a way, yes. I think this case is a real wake-up call for us.
Yeah.
We got to look beyond what we think we know and explore new possibilities.
That's what makes science so exciting.
It really is. It's constantly evolving.
Yeah.
We're always finding new information and challenging old ideas.
And this is a perfect example of how one unusual case can change everything.
It really is. It's like this ripple effect, starting with this one cat and spreading out to potentially help countless other cats in the future.
Wow. That's an incredible thought.
It is. Even when there's tragedy, there's still the potential for amazing things to happen.
So for all the vets and cat owners out there, what are some of the key takeaways from this deep dive? What can we learn from this case?
Well, I think the most important thing is that anytime a cat shows any neurological symptoms, we have to take it seriously.
Right.
Even if the blood work looks normal, we need to keep investigating, especially with imaging like an MRI.
So even if it's something small, like a little stumble or a change in personality, those could be red flags.
Absolutely. The earlier we catch these tumors, the better the chance of a good outcome.
And it sounds like communication between vets and owners is really important too.
Definitely. Vets need to be honest about the risks and benefits of different treatments.
Yeah.
And cat owners need to be ready to make some tough decisions.
It's a team effort.
It is. And don't be afraid to get a second opinion.
Okay.
Or talk to a specialist. Sometimes a new perspective can be really helpful.
That's great advice. I think we've covered just about everything in this deep dive. We've explored this amazing case, talked about how complex these MPNSTs are, and even looked ahead at what the future holds for research.
It's been quite a journey, and I hope everyone listening has learned something new.
I'm sure they have. So to wrap things up, what's one message you want to leave our listeners with today?
I think it's just to never underestimate the power of observation. Pay attention to your cat. If you see anything unusual, anything that worries you, talk to your vet. Early detection is so important, and knowledge is power.
That's excellent advice. And on that note, from Vet NeuroJar, keep those minds inspired, hearts light, and tails wagging.